Hello and welcome to Mysterious Realities. We would love to hear what you think about today's case and any suggestions of cases you wish to see us cover in future episodes. We would also really appreciate it if you could like the episode, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell so you never miss a new episode. It really makes a huge difference. Introduction. The legend of the Bell Witch, or as sometimes referred to as the Bell Witch haunting, started with a farmer called John Bell in the 19th century. Bell and his family had settled in southern United States in an area of northwest Robertson County, Tennessee. The Bell family lived along the Red River near the town of Adams. However, the Bell family would come to be tormented by this entity from 1817 to 1820. Unfortunately for the local residents, the activity of this entity, whilst mainly targeted towards the Bells, also found themselves under attack by what was described as a mostly invisible entity, with the ability to speak, affect the physical environment, and take the shape of a variety of creatures, including humans. In addition, some reports claimed that the entity may have been clairvoyant with a capability of moving across great distances within an instance, and/or of being sighted in more than one place at a time. There have been many reports, stories and fabrication of the Bell Witch. However, in 1894, a newspaper editor, Martin Ingram, published what he claimed was an authenticated history of the Bell Witch. This piece of work has become widely regarded as the first full-length record of the legend and has been the backbone of subsequent writings on the subject. In Ingram's book, he recorded individuals that were and are known historical personalities, adding to his claim of authenticity. However, today's skeptics regarded Ingram's endeavors as, at best, a work of historical fiction, or at its worst, a fraud. Of course, there are also researchers that happily consider Ingram's work as an accurate reflection of belief in the region during the 19th century and the activity linked to the Bell Witch. What happened and why? Martin Ingram stated that the entity's name was Kate, and that Kate was behind poltergeist, visual and auditory activity. It was also reported that the entity, on one of the occasions that it spoke, had said that she was Old Kate Batts. Indeed, if this name was used in any communication, the entity would generally respond with positivity. Interestingly, the actual physical activity was directed towards John Bell and his youngest daughter Betsy. This seemed to increase when Betsy became engaged to a local man, Joshua Gardner. The first signs that something wasn't quite right appeared in 1817. John claimed to have witnessed an apparition of a dog-like creature. Taken aback, Bell fired at the creature. However, it just disappeared in front of his eyes. Following this concerning event, Bell's son Drew observed and approached a bird that he had never seen before, perched on a fence. He noted that when it flew away it was of extraordinary size. Next, Betsy, whilst out walking, and to her horror, saw a girl in green dress swinging from the limb of an old oak tree. One of the Bell's servants then reported that he had been followed by a large black dog on a number of occasions whilst out of an evening visiting his wife. It wasn't long before the activity developed, and it would be the Bell household that would experience the next stage of this haunting. The Bells would hearing loud knocking heard on the doors and along the walls. Gnawing sounds could be heard coming from the beds in which they were sleeping. The Bells would go on to experience invisible dogs fighting, and what sounded like chains being dragged along the floor. After a period of time, the activity began to become more serious. John Bell would experience a paralysis in his mouth. Sheets from the children's beds were pulled away whilst the children slept. The entity further increased the physical activity by pulling the hair and scratching the children. Unfortunately for Betsy, she became the main target of the entity, as she was also slapped, pinched, had pins stuck into her, and would often have her hair tied to her bedposts. Desperately in need of help, the Bells turned to a friend of the family, James Johnston. He agreed to spend the night with the Bells, and, in all likelihood, he may not have believed what his friend had told him. Johnston retired for the night, and after a period of sleep, he was awoken by the same phenomena the Bells had suffered. It wasn't long before the news of the Bell's misfortune spread, with people traveling great distances to see the witch. The entity then progressed to communication, speaking clearly and loudly when questioned. One visitor asked, "Who are you and what do you want?" With the entity replying, "I am a spirit. I was once very happy but have been disturbed." The entity would claim a range of reasons for haunting the Bells, including the disturbance of a Native American burial mound to buried treasure. The power of the entity became a real worry for the Bells and the residents, as one Sunday, the entity was able to repeat word for word 2 sermons given 13 miles apart at the same time. The entity was able to share gossip involving other people and their households. One witness reported that it would seem as though the entity had left for a moment to visit the homes of those with an inquiry. James Johnston's son, John, cleverly devised a test for the entity, an answer that only his own family would know. John asked the entity what his Dutch step-grandmother would say to the slaves if she thought they did something wrong. The witch replied in the voice of John's grandmother's, "Hut tut, what has happened now?" Despite the aggressive and violent nature of the haunting, there were also times that the Bell Witch showed a softer side. More noticeability, this behavior was directed toward John Bell's wife, Lucy. Lucy was reportability beautiful on the inside as well as out, and the Bell Witch would often give Lucy fresh fruit and even sing to her. John's son, John Bell Jr. was also treated more kindly than other members of his family. However, the Bell Witch harbored a growing hatred for John Bell. During one period of communication she addressed John as Old Jack, and claimed that she intended to kill him using curses and afflictions. The haunting of John reached its predictable end in 1820, when John became ill after being poisoned. The Bell Witch made it clear to all attending Bell's funeral and announced that she was now going to leave the family in peace. Unfortunately, the entity made her return just 7 years later, returning to haunt the remaining Bell family in 1828. This time, her attentions were towards John's widow Lucy, and her sons Richard and Joel. However, they did not acknowledge the activity and the entity disappeared again. Interesting claims. It is rumored that a member of the Bell family served with General Andrew Jackson, who, after an encounter with the entity, is claimed to have said that he would rather face the whole of the British Army than the Bell Witch again. An account of Jackson's visit presented in the work of Ingram. The date of the visit to the Bell farm is provided, but Ingram states that the Bell family had been drained of their supplies following a large number of visitors. Jackson and his men arrived with a wagon full of fresh supplies. As they neared the Bell farm, the wagon suddenly stopped and was stuck fast despite the efforts of Jackson's men to get it free. Reportedly, Jackson announced, "By the Eternal, boys, it is the witch." And in response to this, and in a metallic voice, the entity replied, "All right, General, let the wagon move on, I will see you again tonight." The wagon became free and began moving again. Staying at the Bell family home, Jackson found himself conversing with a witch layer who boasted of his supernatural ability. Jackson, having grown tired of the man, stated, "By the Eternals, I do wish the thing would come, I want to see him run." In a clear response to Jackson's words, the entity arrived, taunting the witch layer to shoot her. However, his gun would not fire. Laughing, the Bell Witch promised to teach him a lesson and started to beat the man, leading him out the door by his nose. Jackson exclaimed, "By the Eternal, boys, I never saw so much fun in all my life. This beats fighting the British." However, paranormal investigator Benjamin Radford has found no evidence that Andrew Jackson visited the Bell family home. In his book, The Bell Witch, A Mysterious Spirit, Charles Bailey Bell, grandson of John Bell Jr., recounted stories told to him by his great-aunt Betsy later in her life. This included, he claimed, a confirmation of Andrew Jackson's visit and a separate story of a boy who became trapped in the Bell Witch cave and was pulled out of the cave feet first by the witch. Bob Bell, a direct descendant of John Bell, claimed to have experienced slamming doors, footsteps being heard walking along the corridor to his bedroom. Bob stated that the footsteps were loud enough for him to think an intruder was in the home, so, grabbing his gun, he went through the home room by room but found nothing. In 1977, local, Bonnie Hanneline, told of a time during her childhood, around 1944, she left school to go exploring the Bell Witch Cave. She borrowed a lantern from the cave owner Mrs. Garrison. While she was inside, Bonnie claimed her lantern blew out despite no breeze being inside the cave. She managed to relight the lantern and it blew out again. Terrified, she clawed her way along the water path of the cave in the dark. Reaching the entrance, she discovered an opened can of pork and beans and marshmallows. Later, she learned that 2 escaped fugitives had been found in the back of the cave. She believed that the witch had helped her avoid them. Later that year, it is reported of 5 soldiers from nearby Fort Campbell visited the Bell Witch Cave. One of the soldiers, being a non-believer, was sitting on a rock and expressing skepticism of the witch, when suddenly, something invisible grabbed him around the chest. More recently, there is a story of a group of local young men, who set out to find John Bell's original grave site. Upon finding it, it is reported that they lifted the stone and placed it in the back of their car. However, on the way back, the car was involved in a terrible accident, and they all died. Local legend is that the Bell Witch had gone after them. In 1987, H.C. Sanders, who was the owner of a nearby gas station, reported that in one night in 1967, he had run out of gas in his car near the Red River which runs across from the Bell Witch Cave. He claimed that he began to walk towards town when a rabbit appeared out from the woods and began to follow him. Sanders was spooked by this and started to walk faster, but the rabbit kept pace even when he started to run. After about a mile, he sat down on a log trying to catch his breath. The rabbit hopped up on the other side of the log, looked at him and said, "Hell of a race we had there, wasn't it?" Conclusion. Regardless of whether you believe in the paranormal, investigator Ben Radford believes the Bell Witch story is an important for all paranormal researchers. He states, "It shows how easily legend and myth can be mistaken for fact and real events, and how easily the lines are blurred, and this is very true when sources are not, or have been unable to be checked. The burden of proof is not on skeptics to disprove the paranormal but rather for the believers to prove the claims." Thank you for listening. What do you think happened to John Bell and his family? Do you believe that the family is still suffering from the Bell Witch haunting? Have you ever visited the Bell Witch Caves? Let us know in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this case, please share, like and subscribe and help us grow our community.